Welcome to Blender add-on development for beginners. In this video we are going to look at user preferences. Our add-on needs things like an email address, a server name, etc. in order to send an email at the end of a render job. And it would be inconvenient if the user had to enter those every time they started the job. So what we want is a nicely laid out collection of properties like we show here, preferably with some sanity checks for allowed email addresses and a way to test the configuration. So let's see how we can achieve that. As mentioned before, mail itself is simple because of Python's extensive library, so we import the necessary modules at the start. We import the usual modules we need to register a Blender add-on, and the BL-info boilerplate is also nothing special. But the next bit is, we want to check any email address the user may enter for validity, so we define a regular expression to define what is acceptable. If regular expressions are not your thing, but you want to know a bit more, check out the link in the description for extra info. But all this regular expression says is that we expect some alphanumerical characters, followed by an @ sign and a domain, where the domain must have at least one dot and the top level domain must be 2 characters or longer. That might be too restrictive if you want to allow non-Latin characters, but it's okay for our purpose. We also define a function that accepts a string and returns true or false depending on whether the string contains a valid email address. We also want to make it possible to test the email configuration and display the results to the user. How we will do that we'll see in a moment, but here we define a global variable with a status and a helper function to reset it. Next up is defining our user preferences themselves. It derives from the add-on preferences class and it needs a unique BLID name that can be used elsewhere in the code to get access to the preferences. A logical choice is to use dunder name because that is the same everywhere in our code but different in any other add-on. Then we define a couple of properties. First, the email address we want to send our message to. Then the email address of the sender and a password. Most email providers require you to authenticate yourself in order to use their server to send an email. So we need to store this. Both properties have an update callback that resets the connection status, because if we change anything about the server configuration, it may no longer work and we should signal the user to retest it. The same is true for the server name and the port it will be listening on. Note that this add-on we assume that the mail server requires SSL and therefore the default port is set to 465. We talk a bit more about that when we look at the actual mail implementation. We still need to display the properties, so we need a draw method. Blender's layout options are limited but quite powerful still, so we organize our properties into 4 rows. The first row will display the recipient email and we want to give some feedback on whether it's valid. Rows and columns are derived from UI layout and have an alert attribute, and if this attribute is true, it will be rendered in a different color, typically red, although that can be configured in a theme. So here we use our isValidEmailAddress helper function to set that attribute. We do something similar for the sender email. The other properties are simply added without checks. The last thing we draw is a column with just a label that shows the connection status. We use columns so we can center it, and later we will add some additional buttons here. User preference classes need to be registered, and because later we will define additional classes that need to be registered, we define a tuple to hold those classes so that we won't have to change our register function as well. If you are not too familiar with Python and wondering why a tuple of one element needs that weird comma, that is because without it, it would be just an expression in parentheses. We could have used a list instead, but once defined, classes won't change anymore, so a tuple is more appropriate. Also note the loop variable class with a K, that is because class is a keyword and we cannot use that as a variable name. Okay, we have saved our file, now let's install it as an add-on. Preferences, add-ons, install from disk, locate the file and see how the user preferences look. Let's enter an email address and it stays all red, as it should because it's not a valid email address without a domain. So let's add that and it works. So we have some preferences now, but no way to test its functionality yet. So let's uninstall the add-on and extend it a bit in the next video.